so that we can share Jerusalem. Jerusalem must remain an open city, but two capitals for two nations on the political level, and where the three religions can enjoy equal freedom and equal legal status. This is what we are talking about. And whether some of us believe in Oslo or we don't believe in Oslo, this is the bottom line. And this is what we insist upon. It is a challenge for all of us. It is a challenge for the American Jewish community in the States to have a prophetic voice. A challenge for the American government, for the Congress, for the Senate, in playing a decisive role in creating peace based on justice. For peace will be engineered right here in Washington, D.C. Can we dare, for the sake of all of our children, to dream dreams and see visions? Let us put our hands together and let us, with the help of the one and true God whom we worship, be guided in inventing a just peace. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. I'm afraid that Father Atik has prefaced my remarks by calling them futile and indeed even possibly utterly insane. But nonetheless, it falls to me to make a case for looking at the various religious claims to Jerusalem and to argue in favor of a single undivided Jerusalem that remains under Israeli control. My approach will be not to talk about the present and future, contrary to his wishes, but rather to look to the past, because I believe that the past will determine the future of Jerusalem. And it is important to look at the spiritual and historical claims to the city. Whom has it served as a capital? What emotional and religious ties are taken to the city? I don't know if you looked at the biographies of the panelists, but actually three of us are historians. I think I may be the only medieval historian, however, and therefore I'll ask your indulgence in these most current affairs of buildings to consider some of the medieval history of this city. I will ignore the Christian claims to the city, not to speak of the Canaanite, because they are not live in making claims to Jerusalem politically today. I'll look only at the Jewish and the Islamic. And I'll look only briefly at the Jewish, which is not my area of specialty, but only to note that Jerusalem has unique place. Breaking of a glass remembers Jerusalem. And indeed the enemies of Jews over the centuries have known this, and thus the phrase heb, which was a torment to Jews in Europe, Jerusalem et perdita, meaning Jerusalem is lost, we have lost it. And so it's a deeply emotional and central city in the Jewish faith, and indeed in Jewish politics. What I'd like to concentrate, however, is the role of Jerusalem in Islam, where I believe it has had a distinctly secondary importance through the centuries and has only emerged as a leading issue at certain times. The city is not mentioned in the Quran, and no events in Muhammad's life feel directly connected to Jerusalem, historically connected. It was the first place to which prayers were oriented, for about a year and a half in Muhammad's lifetime. But that was changed, as you all know, to Mecca. And indeed, that very change implied a rejection of Jerusalem. And it is no coincidence that he who prays in Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem has his back turned toward Mount Moriah, where once, for a brief period, as a Muslim, did pray. But I think the most important thing is the role of Jerusalem in Islamic history. Jerusalem has emerged as a focal point of Muslim, religious, and political interests only in response to political needs. This has occurred in four main periods in the last 14th century. During the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, during the first empire of Islam, the Umayyad period, during the Crusades, and now in the 20th century. And again, I'll ask your indulgence to let me go through the three historical, though very remote instances, in order to create the context in which we see the 20th century and indeed the immediate history that we now live in. During the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, he adopted a variety of practices that were friendly to Jews. He adopted a Yom Kippur-like fast, a synagogue-like place of prayer. There was permission to eat food and marry Jews, and there was, as I mentioned before, the facing the prayer towards Jerusalem. Historians believe there are two motives for this. One was to reconcile with the Jews of Medina, and secondly was to substantiate Muhammad's prophethood by showing his similarity with the existing established religion. Jews, however, rejected Muhammad's gestures, and he eventually, in 624 AD, broke with them and had the prayer to change towards Mecca. This incident set the pattern whereby Muslims take interest religiously in Jerusalem because of pressing political concerns. When those concerns lapse, the standing of Jerusalem diminishes. The second example is the Umayyad period. The Umayyads ruled from Damascus from 661 to 750. They were arch rivals with Medina, and they were interested in building up Syria. They sought to aggrandize Syria's role and diminish the importance of Mecca. And they took a variety of steps, including, in one case, the first caliph taking the oath of office, as it were, in Jerusalem. But more important were to build monumental sacred structures, including the Dome of the Rock in 691 and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 715. And most interesting and most important was the naming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because in the Quran it says that God took his servant, meaning Muhammad, by night from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the furthest mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Masjid Al-Aqsa, the furthest place of worship. It did not say, the Quran does not indicate where this place is. And indeed, early interpretations understood the furthest mosque, the furthest place of prayer, to be in heaven, to be a metaphorical term. But what happened later in the century, this Quranic verse came in about 621. Later, a century later, 715, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built in Jerusalem, thereby substantiating what had been until then a rhetorical term. And with the placement of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem followed a whole sequence of other events Quranically in Jerusalem. The nocturnal journey of Muhammad was now to Jerusalem. The ascension to heaven was now from Jerusalem. And a whole variety of hadith, of traditions, of sayings attributed to Muhammad were created around Jerusalem. The site of the Last Judgment was now taking place in Jerusalem, and a whole genre of literature called praise of Jerusalem was developed in order to imbue Jerusalem with a special status. The Roman name, which had been prevalent until that time, was abandoned in favor of Quds, of the Holy. Thus did the Umayyads' political decision to elevate the standing of Jerusalem have theological consequences. Thus did their building program directly lead to the sanctification of Jerusalem. And this is shown by the fact that the Umayyads fell in 750, and the capital moved to Baghdad. All this fell by the wayside. Books praising the city lost favor. No more glorious buildings. The existing ones indeed fell apart. The Dome of the Rock collapsed one time. Jerusalem lived as an out-of-the-way provincial town of no particular interest to anyone. And so in 1099, when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, there was very little interest in the city. There were few repercussions. No one hardly noticed. But as the Crusaders launched a variety of aggressive attacks from Jerusalem, the surrounding Muslim states did take notice. And in order to beat back this new threat coming from Jerusalem, a the politicians felt the need to arouse jihad sentiments against the presence of the Crusaders in Jerusalem. And they did so through the production of poetry, of eulogies to Jerusalem, and of new hadith. One hadith, for example, says that Jerusalem, falling to the infidels, is the second greatest catastrophe facing Islam after his own death. What happened in the course of 50 years from 1100 to 1150, roughly, was that fractured opinions turned into a powerful new sensibility, and that Jerusalem, as the third most holy city of Islam, was now fully established. After the Crusades, after the victory in 1187 by Saladin, Jerusalem again lapsed into obscurity. Writers in the city complain that no one is coming to visit them. It is ignored by and large politically. It is for many years without even a wall until the 16th century, making it open to the depredations of the nearby nomads. In the 20th century, we see the same pattern. Jerusalem became the focus of religious and political Arab activity only at the beginning of this century, and only because of renewed Jewish activity in the city and Judaism's claim upon the Western or the Wailing Wall. The control case to see this is to compare the period, say, from 1917 to 1960 to 1947, when it was under British control. From 1917 to 1948, under British control. From 48 to 67, under Jordanian control, and then 67 under British. There was a lot of interest in Jerusalem when it was under control of the British. Most dramatically, in 1931, the Mertv, Hajj Amin Hussein, held the Jerusalem Muslim Congress, which brought together notables from around the Muslim world to protect Jerusalem. But once Jerusalem fell to Jordanian control in 1948, all interest was lost in the city. There are interesting complaints coming from Jerusalem about its neglect. Local institutions were broken, such as the Arab Pirate Union. Others were moved, such as the treasury of the Watch of the War Thing. All government offices, there were quite a few government offices in Jerusalem because it had been the capital of mandatory Palestine under the British. These were moved to Amman, the capital of the Jordan. If you wanted to take a bank loan, if you wanted to order a telephone, if you wanted to register a parcel, you had to go to Amman. You couldn't do it in Jerusalem. Friday prayers, this is the most perhaps ridiculous. Friday prayers did not come from Al-Aqsa Mosque. No question, the most holy mosque. Renowned mosque in the Jordanian kingdom, but rather came from Amman. There was no interest in building Jerusalem. No Arab visitor, no Arab heads of state, other than King Hussein, visited Jerusalem. And King Hussein went there only very rarely. He had bad memories. And indeed, it's particularly interesting to note that King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who after 1967 devoutly wished on many occasions that he could pray in Jerusalem, never did pray in Jerusalem before 1967. The interest came only with the deprivation. June of 1967 and Israeli control led to major changes. A whole lot of themes that had been developed in the Crusader period re-emerged. The Hadith were now published again. The old arguments came back. So in summary, what I propose to you is that Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, never served as the capital of a sovereign Muslim state, and never became a cultural center under the Muslim control. Nothing of political import was initiated there, and probably, though not significant, there was never a Muslim majority in the city. It is not a city of premier importance in Islam unless there's a political claim for it. However, in recent times we see much revisionist thinking along these lines. Jerusalem is now presented as a key to the Islamic religion. Politics, in conclusion, I will present to you. Politics is the motor force in Islamic capitalism. The interest rises and falls with political conditions. In the Umayyad period, in the period of the Prophet Muhammad, there was an interest in reconciling, to attracting the Jewish support. In the Umayyad period, there was an interest in building up Syria. In the Counter-Crusade, there was an interest in arousing jihad sentiments against Christians. And today, it is somewhat the same, arousing sentiments against Jewish control of the city. Islam, in contrast, has two key cities, Mecca and Medina. Mecca is the holy city of Islam. put it very roughly and very unconsciously, Mecca is the Jerusalem of Islam. Muslims believe, for example, that Abraham nearly sacrificed his son Isaac not in Mecca. Muhammad lived in Mecca. Muslims turn to Mecca. Non-Muslims are forbidden to enter into Mecca. It is an entirely 100% Muslim city. As a Muslim writer wrote just this week in the Wall Street Journal, it's very mentioned, Mecca's very mention reverberates awe in Muslim hearts. That's similar to the kind of awe that reverberates in Jewish hearts. So Jews have only one city. It is Jerusalem. With due respect for the protection of all holy places, free access to all holy places, which of course is an absolute requirement, in which I think Israel has quite admirably performed over the past 30 years. Jerusalem should stay under full Jewish control and serve only as capital of the Jewish nation.
Dr. Rashid Khan.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I am a modern historian. I'm going to talk about some of the religious issues and other issues that my learned colleagues touched on. And I'm going to start by saying that the idea that Jerusalem constitutes the exclusive property of one party, which has privileged rights there, this is a very old idea. In ancient times and many, many other times during the more than 40 centuries of history of Jerusalem, this city has been conquered and then treated as if it belongs to the conqueror alone. Each time, of course, the arguments that are used to justify such behavior went far beyond the usual conqueror's claim of playing things right. Most frequently, religious justifications were utilized to give a patent on legitimacy to these kinds of appropriations and to the attendant dispossessions with them. Now, while it was somewhat barbaric, at least this old-fashioned approach had the merit of simplicity. The spirit in which old-time conquerors approached this matter was generally refreshingly straightforward. They used to say, Jerusalem used to belong to them, whoever they were. We took it because of divine favor, and now it is ours to do with exactly as we please. The religious arguments in which this argument from brute force was generally clothed, in fact, mattered a lot less than the brute force involved. This was the nub of the matter. So, while there was a fair share of hypocrisy, a fair share of cant in the old approach, it generally relied in essence on the sword, sometimes quite unashamedly. Now, I mention, or I refer to this ancient history, not because I plan to regale you with tales of Jebusites and Israelites, much as I would like to. I do it rather because I think it's relevant to our topic today. We are constantly told that there is a special, privileged, and most important, exclusive Israeli claim to Jerusalem today because of the undisputed ancient attachment to Jerusalem of the Jewish religious tradition. Now, we have to start by accepting that this is an argument which carries enormous force. It carries force not because it's important to Jews, but because followers of all three of the monotheistic faiths, which grew out of the Abrahamic tradition, out of the Abrahamic heritage, revere this tradition, both in general and as it applies to Jerusalem. But I would argue that in fact the ancient, the enduring, the indisputable attachment to Jerusalem of the Jewish religious tradition is today being exploited to cloak what is at base no more than the old, brutal legitimation by conquest approach. I think we have to remember that what is being argued by those who do this is not that the ancient and enduring religious attachment to Jews of Israel justifies Jews to Jerusalem justifies a modern religious attachment or freedom of worship for Jews in Jerusalem. What is being claimed is that this ancient attachment takes precedence over all others, that it is more ancient, that it is more sacred, that it is more important than what others feel today for the Holy City. This, in turn, is used to justify exclusive Israeli sovereignty and control over the entire city. Now, I think you should think about this, because what is at work is particularly insidious because it is so very subtle. Since no believing Christian or Muslim could possibly deny the Jewish affiliation to Jerusalem without denying a central tenet of his or her faith, this indisputable Jewish religious connection is utilized to serve two purposes. The first is to make plausible a seamless continuity between this enduring centuries-old spiritual union for Jerusalem among Jews the world over and the secular political purposes and nationalist ambitions in today's Jerusalem of the modern nation-state of Israel. The second is to delegitimize the political claims of others by projecting a relatively recent political connection with Jerusalem 3,000 years back in time. Thus, while it is argued that Christians or Muslims can claim only 1,000 or 400 or 2,000 years of contiguous attachment to Jerusalem, respectively, Jews can claim 3,000. Then, and I want you to notice the very sophisticated bait-and-switch tactic that is used. It is first claimed that this ancient Jewish religious attachment is in fact nothing other than an early variant of modern-day nationalism. We are projecting a 20th century phenomenon back into 3,000 years ago. Secondly, it is then assumed that David, King Solomon, were nothing other than very early prime ministers of a very early state of Israel. The state of Israel equals the ancient Israelite state. It is thereupon assumed that the sources whereby we know what we do of Jerusalem in the time of David and Solomon are genuine historical sources, rather than accounts of religious traditions, myths, and beliefs that were set down 500 years ago. In other words, longer than the time between us and Columbus. 500 years after the time of these events. Thereupon, all of this is started up with the results of generations of biblical archaeology, which has taken these historically questionable texts as its underground roadmap, and which refers exclusively to the Bible in doing so. Thereupon, a couple of thousand years of intervening history are conveniently forgotten, and voila, we have the modern myth, whereby the only legitimate claim to Jerusalem is that of the modern Israeli nation-state. Now, all of this serves to obscure a very important fact. This is that the ancient Jewish connection with Jerusalem has profound meaning for both Christians and Muslims. For both of them, this connection has been fully incorporated into their central religious narratives in such a way that to argue, as some do, for the exclusivity of these attachments is in fact to misunderstand profoundly the beliefs of others. Thus, in the Christian Bible, the Old Testament is an integral part of the scriptural undergirding of faith. It's not just the passion of Jesus which causes Christians to venerate Jerusalem, but also the traditions and beliefs which Christians share with Jews about the city. Similarly, Muslims believe in the Jewish connection with Jerusalem as an integral part of God's message to mankind. They see the biblical prophets without exception as among their prophets, and they venerate them, all notably David and Solomon. It is not simply the night journey of the prophet Muhammad to Jerusalem, to the Masjid al-Aqsa, which in fact, it should be argued, can only be understood as Jerusalem in the context of 621, when Muslims were praying towards Jerusalem. It's not simply the Isra of the prophet to Jerusalem described in Surah 17 of the Quran, which causes Muslims to venerate the city. It is indeed the earlier connection with earlier prophets. What is at issue, therefore, is not the Jewish claim to Jerusalem. That claim is in fact endorsed and upheld by all believers in the Abrahamic tradition. It's rather the exclusivity of that claim, and more importantly, its present utilization for naked political purposes. Now, all of this leads me to the most important matter at issue, which is that, in fact, modern Israeli nationalism has been constructed in part through a reweaving in nationalist political terms of biblical and other narratives. But that's not very unusual. Similarly, Palestinian nationalism has been constructed in part on the basis of these same biblical narratives and the related Quranic narratives. What is at issue is not the refutation or advocacy of any of these nationalist claims. I don't propose to do that today. Nationalism is a matter of belief, after all, and sometimes it's quite irrational belief. Eric Hobsbawm said once, no serious historian of nations and nationalism can be a committed political nationalist. Nationalism requires too much belief in what is patently untrue. So our point here is not the truth. Our point here is what people believe and its political significance. What we should be trying to do, if we are serious about looking for a solution for Jerusalem, is to avoid denigrating the claims of others. We must recognize that these claims, the national ones and the religious ones, exist and have a